discussion, we're going to talk about the evolution of corporate training, what it was, what it isn't, what it should be. What have we learned from it? The way the modern employee learns, what sticks, what actually translates knowledge to application. We're going to look at alternatives for effective learning. And finally, we're going to look at how can technology help? Does it really have to cost an arm and a leg, or other affordable and accessible ways to make this happen for our employees? And finally, we're going to look into the future of learning and corporations and the higher education as well. I'm really, really excited to have two great speakers on board with me here today. So just to quickly do an introduction, my name is Elena Garagimova. I come from a corporate learning background, been working in various organizations to institutions around the US as well as the Middle East, along with Edan, who is also on this call, Edan Palomino, who's a technology innovation expert. We have jumped ship from our companies a few years back, and we have started Besson, where we help employees and organizations thrive and perform at their best. And finally, I really am thankful to have Edan Kertis here with us. Edan, welcome. Thank you for being here. Edan is a behavioral change expert. He's a software engineer, and he's the creator of the AFT learning model. It's one of the most innovative and powerful models to teach and train people online. And I'm sure we're going to talk a bit about that. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here, and thanks to our audience for being here as well.
Thank you for hosting us, Elena.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and just jump into the first question. So just to kind of, set the scene for this discussion, I think it'll be good for us to reflect on, the evolution of corporate training and what really have we learned, right? So how has the corporate training changed from your experiences over these last years? And especially a lot of it has changed over the last year in particular, but even previously to that.
Elena, one of the key things that has happened, and this is mainly because of the COVID crisis, is that the design on the pandemic has affected what is the traditional scope of human resources in terms of the capability buildings in the workplace. So the priorities have shifted. So from the regular administrative tasks that human resources have been doing pre-COVID, taking care of trainings, what you call the traditional training, into more protecting the workforce with the health and safety, where there has been a major shift, in fact, on how to take care of them, but more into different areas of the promoting the workers' well-being. And the other thing is about the sense of purpose has been growing around organizations, so that in order to increase communication and collaboration inside of the workforce. And that has been the major shift. In one of the recent studies done by KPMG, in fact, they have noticed during COVID that the leadership in corporations was not ready for this change. What has happened is that we weren't able to deal with people working from home. We were not able to channel, in fact, all of this anxiety of uncertainty around the workplace. And that has made the organization realize that we were not human-centered enough. And that has produced a major shift into what are the priorities of the organization. The sense of purpose, the sense of how do you upskill your organization, specifically in areas where the psychological resources are important. And that wasn't there before. It is a major change. Edan, what have you observed from your side?
Yes, so first I agree with you, Ivan. The fact that everyone are working from home right now, or working in hybrid mode, sometimes from the office and sometimes from home, it really changed the way organizations look on training, and also on how do they our HR department actually reinforce the workforce. I think like what we've seen last year, that I don't know what's the situation right now in the EU, but really like all in-person training has been canceled and all training moved to digital, and many companies like try to reinvent the way they train their employees. Many of the training of the in-person training has shifted into Teams or Zoom sessions, but companies started to face with new challenges such as Zoom fatigue, and like how can you really transform like an 8-hour like all day training session into like a Zoom session, which is now people don't have the attention for it. So this is one challenge that many organizations are facing at the moment. Another challenge that many organizations are facing is that people are very isolated at the moment, like especially when people are working from home, they don't have the connectivity they used to have with their colleagues. And this is one of the biggest challenge organization facing right now. And actually it's really connected into training, because I think one of the biggest challenge organization face in training, even before COVID, was that people were, especially with online training, that people were isolated. And they didn't have enough connection with their colleagues. So now it's not just in training, it's actually in daily work. So we as like a L&D professional, as an HR professional, we need to think how can we connect people in training, but also during the work, because eventually the studies show that if you want to reduce turnover and churn in the organization, and if you want the employee to be happy, people are connected to their colleagues. They're not necessarily connected to the brand, but they're connected to their colleagues. And it's all about creating these connections. And one more point that I want to add, I don't know if you're familiar with Donald H. Taylor. He's the chairman of the biggest learning technology conference in Europe. And is one of the most influential in Europe for L&D. And he has it, every year he's doing like a survey among like thousands of L&D experts, like what are their priorities. And this year, the #1 priority is reskilling and upskilling, because people like everything changed so fast and we need to upskill our employees. But #2, which was not even on the top priorities before COVID, is actually collaborative and social learning. So the fact that we can connect people together during training, but also during work, became a top priority for organizations.
It was also highlighted in the HR Trends study that was published like 1 month ago, exactly what you said, upskilling and collaborations are the major places where human resources should focus. What I like the most, Edan, it is about when you talk about the feeling of isolation. So it looks for me that in the pre-COVID, we were living in a world that was a little bit binary, where the only choices was in-class training, where the challenge is that the brain itself doesn't function in order to have 8 hours of training. You cannot process. The cognitive part of our brain does not allow us to focus, retain during 8 hours of in-class training. And then the other option was the typical e-learning, where you just browse, you just go through pages, and you feel alone in the journey. You have questions, and it's not relatable because you don't have the possibility to, in order to process the information, you need to have the possibility to have it something where you feel connected, that is related to your day-to-day work. People are dreaming, and that was a 78% of workers who wants to have trainings that are in the flow of work. Sorry, the e-learnings are not in the flow of work. You are alone going through pages and you just browse, and that shows, and there is a number that shows that around 20% of people who does e-learnings doesn't finish it. No, sorry, it's the opposite. The opposite.
Maybe 20% finish it.
Exactly.
In the best case.
Sorry, the other way around. Thank you. So from these two options, and because of COVID, feeling alone, reconsideration of the employee as a center of the workplace, we are reconsidering all these all these traditional means of doing things. And I like what it can become.
As you guys are talking about upskilling and reskilling, I'm just curious, as new generations are coming in, and the way people learn is very different from person to person, let alone from generation to generation. So I'm just curious, do you see any difference in the way generations learn? So does it really depend on age? Is there an age where it's harder for us to learn? Is there any commonalities across generations?
Yeah. I think if you're looking at the Gen X and before that, people were very oriented to the organization. So usually the learning would come from the organization, and it would need to serve the organization. And people were fine with this. Like if we need to learn X, Y, and Z, and it comes from the top. So even if it's not related to my daily work, or it's not related, actually, I feel that it improves me. People had that mindset, okay, this is part of our work, we need to do this. Starting from Gen Y, and actually there is a big difference between Gen Y and Gen Z. Gen Y, it's all about meaningfulness. People want to feel that they have meaning in their work, and especially meaning in their learning. So people don't want to learn just for the sake of learning, or someone told us to do this. People want to learn because they feel they can create something meaningful out of it. Now, when we talk about Gen Z, this generation is actually even more practical than Gen Y. If Gen Y wants to create a meaningfulness, Gen Z is all about how do I develop my career? How do I, in a way, my skills are my currency when I move on to my next job, or when I will evolve and develop in the organization. So people don't have anymore the patience to learn something which they don't feel which is really related to their daily work. Now, another thing that we have seen I think in the last 10 years is that because of smartphone and I think we're so overwhelmed with information, people don't really have the capacity of listening to long videos or reading long documents. People want something. This is when the micro-learning approach became very popular. People want something which is fast, easy to digest, and relevant for their daily work, or at least for their career path. And also, they want to be connected with their peers. If you're looking at Gen X and before, people were fine to do the learning alone. Right now, Gen Y, Gen Z, they all want to be connected. They all want to learn from each other and work with each other. Even, what do you think about this?
Edan, I was just thinking about just to drop a bomb about Gen X. So the thing is that we observe how younger generations interact with to learn something, and we try to mime the same behaviors. So, for instance, I consider myself a Gen X. That when I want to learn, I need to learn on the spot. I have become kind of like a millennial because I need to go to YouTube to check for a new information when I need it, and this is something that we see more and more, is that there is a uniformization of all the generations to say, at least in terms of commonalities, to learn, we need to have access to the information when we require. This is number one. Two, and you said it quite nicely, it needs to be short. We cannot watch a 1 hour webinar when we don't have the time. It needs to be, the substance needs to be spotted on the right away. And something that is quite common across generation is the need for personalization of what of the learning. So we have, I mean, corporations have done a lot of efforts to have trainings, e-learnings, computer-based training, self-study, books, you name it. But what is not sufficiently put in the front is the personalization of the learning, the ability to have it on demand, to have the possibility to interact. It's almost like we have one choice or the other. So either is affordable. So we go for e-learnings, but I don't interact with anyone. And God knows that we need some support sometimes to understand. We need to be able to discuss it. And of course, now technology makes it possible to interact remotely at any time. It's about like chatting, and more we see technology even used for mental well-being, where the interactions on coaching are sufficiently well done through apps to chat, and people are going on board. Right now, in fact, recently we were discussing about it with Elena this morning, is that in the area of psychotherapy in the United States, there is already 30% of the population who uses online psychotherapy. So I'm not saying that we need that in the workplace, but I'm saying we are getting used more and more to the convenience of interacting with people when we require. And technology makes it possible right now.
Yeah, and I also think that COVID really accelerated that trend, because right now, if we used to communicate with our colleagues in the office, right now we communicate with them through Microsoft Teams or our collaboration app in the organization. And actually it opened a lot of new opportunities to also bring the learning through those tools and actually create collaborative learning and learning in the flow of work through the collaborative tool employee already use on a daily basis.
Learning on the flow of work, this is something that I love, because when you ask employees what is the best way to learn for them, on the job is 93% of people who says, I want to learn on the job. Unfortunately, even though there is this theory about this 70, 20, 10, or whatever you want to call it in terms of how you should be learning, most of the learning has been done pre-COVID in class, which is completely against the major wish of workers, and is completely against how the brain processes information. In order to learn, it needs to be action-based. It needs to be, if you don't practice, then you don't have any possibility. And more we see this need for mental resources, psychological resources for people. And this is even worse. You cannot show 10, 20 slides for people about how to be resilient at work. It needs to be practice-based with a process. So we see a mismatch between what is offered currently in the workplace and what people needs in order to really perform. And it's not only about technology, it's also about the way, the design of the learning process. You cannot, and Edan mentioned it already, that you cannot do a Zoom training of 8 hours. People fries their brain during 8 hours, right?
Even 2 hours is like very limited.
Exactly, Edan.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing you guys saying is that the future of learning and the way we learn is very individualized. It's accessible when we need it the most, right? And yet we still see so many organizations that are still battling with the 8 hours and the 6 hours. And I know, Edan, we have gotten quite a few requests from companies that say, listen, can you do a 6-hour training? No, not in one shot. Let's put it that way, not in one shot. So these are some of the challenges that we're experiencing. So part of it is just kind of, breaking through the sort of, the way people learn. So, raising awareness that whatever we were doing face to face, and even face to face, people don't learn in that kind of long-term shots. So another challenges that I would imagine a lot of people are dealing with is, understanding how do we learn as humans. So how does our brain actually learn? And Edan, you guys both have kind of already touched base on this, but we can go into a little bit more details. What are the challenges organizations have when it comes to getting their people to learn?
So, Edan, you want to start on this, or you want me to?
I will start. So a couple of non-technical approaches. So first of all, we know that the brain is not made to have long hauls of attention. Attention span is something that needs to be considered when you are teaching someone. It is that we cannot hold for such a long time listening to someone. Second, in order to learn, we need to generate insights. Insights is either practice or reflection in order to make it relatable to your personal job. The other thing is about emotions. Unfortunately, e-learnings do not have any emotions, even though we can see someone funny explaining or something in a good e-learnings. At the end, if you want to not only acquire the knowledge, but to put it in this place of the brain where you create a ritual, where it becomes automatic, an automatic behavior, you need to have this sense of repetition, generation of insights. You need to have this focus necessary to activate the cognition of our brain, to process it and try to put it back there where there is a bunch of rituals that we have in our life, and store it so that it becomes something that is retained. I don't remember exactly the numbers, because I know Edan will say it, because he has the updated numbers about what is the level of retention in traditional training, uh, but it is quite low. And I don't want to use our numbers, because it's always a big discussion about these numbers in terms of retention and applicability of what you learn. Because ultimately, organizations don't pay for memorizing slides. They pay for behaviors that are reflected in a new culture. And talking about the new culture story, so organizations, 80% of the organizations in the Middle East claim that they are going into transformation. So either digital transformation, or they're revising their culture because they have seen that there is a potential that is untapped. Now, you cannot have change of culture without questioning the status quo in terms of training. And that's one of the biggest challenges today, is that people are afraid to try something different that is not the traditional training and the e-learnings. And that fear goes against this transformation of culture that people want, organizations want to create in the world. So it is a little bit a challenge for, as you mentioned, Elena, we still have to convince people to say, move away for the in-class, move away from the 8 hours training.
I totally agree with you, Ivan. I would ask the audience like a question. Try to go back to your days at school. Like, how much of the content or the knowledge that you learned or you actually remember? I'm sure that most of you, when you will reflect on that, you will see that you don't remember probably 98% of the things that you actually learned. And usually the things that you will remember are the things that you practice and the things that you actually had experience with. Because we as a human, we don't learn by memorizing content. We can learn, it can go into the short-term memory, and like few days later we can still remember everything. But actually studies show that when people don't practice what they've learned, 87% of them won't remember anything 2 months after the training. So many times we actually, it's like doing full gas on neutral, trying to teach people stuff. They will maybe remember it for the test at the end of the training, but 2 months later they won't remember it. And really, in order to create effective learning, as Ivan mentioned, we must create action-based learning, and we must create experiences for people, because people remember by doing, and people remember by having emotions as part of the learning, and by really being involved with the learning. And people won't retain the knowledge if it's just about memorizing the content. And we can talk about different strategies on how to do that. Now, another very important element in order to create effective learning for people is not just to take an action, is actually also to get feedback or to have a conversation with someone about it, to reflect on it. Because we need to get, the learning cannot happen only in our space. We must get some input from the outside in order first to, if we are wrong in something, or if we are not in the right path, we need someone to bring us back to the right path. But also having a conversation with another person or getting a feedback, it actually stimulates the brain and actually it's another kind of action-based learning, because the action of reflecting on what I've done, on talking about what I've done, is another action that really helped me to retain the knowledge for the long term. And if you want, we can also touch base upon on the AFT learning model that we developed, which actually talks exactly about those points.
Absolutely. Maybe we can, and because this kind of leads us a little bit into the next discussion, which is about technology, but I think it's also quite important to understand this learning model because it is quite unique. And I think it would be great to talk a little bit about that. And then Edan, if you can talk to us a little bit about how technology can help, and a lot of misconception that the fact that this, this new way of learning is going to cost organizations an arm and a leg, when in fact it does not. So if we can get into that discussion, that would be great as well.
Yeah, of course, I'll be happy to. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
I'll share with you a bit about, my background. I think if when I started MyQuest 8 years ago, and really my goal when I started the company after we sold our previous company, it was in the healthcare space. In the previous company, we actually created software for orthopedics to plan surgeries on computers. And today, the vast majority of hospitals in the world are using the software that we've built. And what I wanted to do with MyQuest was really to empower people to realize their potential. And I thought that the best way to do this is by making learning effective. Now, how can you make learning effective? Back then, it was 2013 and 2012, I started to test hundreds of different LMSs, training tools, and I saw that across the board that the learning completion rates are very low. Even the 20% mark that you mentioned is high. Usually it's even lower, and completion rates are, and engagement rates are even lower. People don't really engage with the content. And I try to identify what are the main problems that make learning ineffective. And let me share my screen with you. I'll show you a quick presentation that we have about this. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So really, what we've seen, we identified 3 main problems that really make online learning ineffective. And I think that by addressing this problem, you can really transform the way that you teach people online. The first problem that we've seen is that learning is passive. So when people are taking a training in the LMS or in any other, even LXPs right now, usually the way people learn is they watch videos, they read documents, but they don't take any action as part of the learning. As we talked about it a few minutes before, but really when people don't take action, they don't retain the knowledge. Action-based learning and experiential learning is maybe the most effective way for people to learn. This is how we learn also as kids. If you think about your kids do not learn by memorizing stuff. Kids learn by experience with things. And when they experience things, this is how they remember it. And as I mentioned before, 87% of the learner won't remember what they learned 2 months after the training if they did not did action and practice what they've learned. And it's also connected to the point that we discussed before on bringing the learning to the flow of work. You really want the learning to be connected with what employees are doing on a daily basis, and you want employees to practice what they are learning, because this is how employees will retain the knowledge. Now, the second problem that we've seen is that learners are isolated, and when people don't have someone with them, they will high likely drop from those courses. And actually, we've seen it last year with COVID. We've all been very isolated, and depressions are very high right now, and many families are right now in, unfortunately, many couples divorce, and because it's very difficult for us as a human being to be isolated. We are a social creature, and also the way we learn by getting feedback and talking with other people. And the fact that with online learning today, people are isolated, this really creates very high churn rate in those training. Now, the last piece, which we've seen that is missing, is that there is no feedback loop. So to create effective learning without feedback is almost impossible. I don't need to speak about it too much because this is quite obvious, but The fact that I learn something and I don't get a feedback about my activity is actually make my learning very ineffective. And this is why, by the way, that you'll see that coaching is very popular right now among enterprises and among organizations. It's one of the biggest trends, and coaching platforms are on the rise, because companies understand that when people are taking the training, they also need to get a feedback as part of the training. Obviously, if it's a compliance that you don't really care and you just want to tick the boxes, it's not related for it. But if you're doing like a leadership training, a sales training, something that you want to create a behavioral change for people, so the feedback part is crucial. And really, in order to address those issues, what we've developed the AFT learning model. It's a very simple yet powerful model. And this is, we also have a training platform that we're working with companies that use our training platform. And our training platform is based on this model. And let me explain it to you real quick. A is action. So really, what we mean by action, we want to transform every activity in the learning into an action. Now, even if you don't use our, like obviously our system is really designed to this model, but even if you're using your LMS, when you're creating like a learning module or a lesson, always try to think what people can do as part of this knowledge that you're delivering them. Like right now, I need to watch a video. Hopefully it will be a short video. We talked about micro-learning. People don't have the attention span. But I watched a 2-minute video, I watched a 3-minute video. Try to think what kind of activity the employee can do after watching this video. If you will add this activity, which is related to what they've just learned, knowledge retention will be like 5 or 10 times higher than if they won't do it. Now, the next component of the model is feedback. So I took an action. Now we want to make sure we want to close the feedback loop for employees. And there are 2 main reasons why it's so important, actually 3 main reasons why it's so important to get the feedback. First, when I get the feedback, it actually allows me if I'm not on the right path, it actually get me back on the right path. If I don't understand something, if I didn't implement something correctly, a feedback can actually make sure I'm doing it in the right way. Now, the second thing which is important with feedback, again, when I'm getting a feedback from someone, it's in a way, it's another action. I'm reflecting on what I've just done, and it helped me to retain the knowledge. Now, the last piece with the feedback, which is important, is actually when I'm getting feedback, there is someone else who is accountable for me. And when there is someone else who is accountable for me, it actually really increase the completion rate of the training, because I'm not alone, I'm not isolated anymore. So this is the feedback part. And with for example, in our training platform, what we've done, we turn each lesson into a mission. Like people really have an action item they need to take. And then they can get the feedback either from a coach, who can be my manager, or external coach, or they can get the feedback from a accountability partner. We can connect people together to get feedback, like they can do the same course together and they can get the feedback from each other, or you can get the feedback from a community. There are multiple ways of how can I get the feedback about my activities, and these are some of the stuff that we implemented in our platform. Now, the last piece is trigger. Focusing on how can I effectively retain the knowledge and create behavioral change, but how do we make sure people go and take the next step? And this is what we do in the trigger section. So if you're looking at the science of habit creation, if you want to create a behavioral change for people, you want people to practice some stuff again and again. Now, obviously, not every training is about creating new habits, but actually, almost every training has 1 or 2 habits that you want employee to create. So, for example, what we've done in our platform, we created a smart way to send push notification to people from their smartphone or through Microsoft Teams to really remind them to go back to the next step. And we want the trigger to be very relevant to what they're doing. So we don't just want to trigger people to say, hey, go back to the learning. We want to tell people, hey, we have seen that yesterday you created this in this module. Now, on the next day, you have this module, go and do this and pay attention to this. We want to personalize those triggers. And actually, if you're able to create those actions, you're able to create action-based learning, you're able to provide feedback to people from accountability partner, from a coach, from a manager, or from the community, and you're able to trigger people to go back and take the next step, you will see a very significant increase both in knowledge retention and in course completion. So this is a bit about our approach. Even you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Edan, I just wanted to encourage dreaming big. So what would happen if the full educational system, higher education, let's start by universities, corporations were applying this way of learning and they were removing the current way of learning like universities? And you were right, I was thinking about how much do I remember from my final exam. So I was putting everything in a temporary memory just to crack the code for that specific exam, and then I forgot everything that was said. So what could happen if there was the option that if you had the magic wand and change higher education, change how we learn in corporation, what could be the outcome that we could expect, Edan?
I think that people will actually be more motivated to learn. People will actually gain those skills. I think right now, if you're looking at higher education, it's about checking the boxes. Obviously it's not, some of what you learn is very related. And in some of those courses, you practice what you learn and you actually remember it. But I think if you're looking on some trends with higher education, right now it's going more and more on, bringing students to corporates and do internship inside those corporates, because we want students to actually experience what they learn in the real environment. Like, if you can really minimize the gap between the theoretical knowledge that I get to the practical things I need to do, as this gap is smaller, this is how you will create more effective learning for people. And I think universities are going in that path, but it's a slow process and it takes its own time.
Very slow. I was also thinking, Edan, that what this approach could produce is that lately there is a huge race of what we call the understanding of what it is intrinsic motivation. So, and we know that the elements of intrinsic motivation, it is accountability, the fact that you have mastery of what you do and the sense of purpose. So imagine that if that big dream of changing the way things are done, and we make people, in fact, learn because they want, not because they are told to do so. That will change a lot of the current challenges that we have. Maybe we have a huge percentage of employees who don't have the motivation to be innovative. And innovation is not something that you learn with e-learning. It is by practice, by having certain rituals. Managing your well-being is something also that is quite related to creating habits. So we would make people that are completely independent to learn. And this idea, your big dream, Elena, of having growth mindset taught in universities, in schools, from primary schools, that could really happen if we had the courage, in fact, to change the current status quo.
Yes, actually, even I like your comment about internal motivation, and I think it's super important because the key part of learning is having, especially with Gen Y and Gen Z, is really have the internal motivation of the learner to learn. And I think in order to do this, first, employee needs to feel that this is actually that serves their career path and actually benefits them in the long term, or in the short term, it's actually that allow them to do their job better. So this is super crucial. I'll give you an example. For example, one of the products in our company, we have two products. One product is the training and coaching platform that implement the AFT learning model and actually create very effective learning in the 10 and the 20%, if you're looking in the 70-20-10 model. Now, another product that we just launched is all about using the internal motivation of employee to learn because they want to do their job better. So what we have done, we realize that everyone right now on Microsoft Teams, and many times employee has challenge or question during the work. Now, employees are spending today 25% of their time searching for knowledge that will help them, or information that will help them to do their work better. Now, many times organization has a traditional approach of let's create a content library, and then employee can just search for what kind of content that they need to do the work. But this approach doesn't work very well because it's not an easy enough process to do. What we have realized is that for 90% of the times when employees face a challenge during their work, there is another person in the organization who can help them. So the new product that we just launched is all about connecting those people in real time. Employee, for example, can submit a challenge or a question. We're using artificial intelligence to find who is the right person in the organization who can help them. And then we connect them through the collaboration app of the organization, for example, through Microsoft Teams. And then people can chat in Microsoft Teams to solve this question. So actually, in this way, we bring the learning to the flow of work and also use the internal motivation of the employee to really learn something in order to accomplish the job.
This is amazing, quite futuristic.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Absolutely. I think it bridges the gap as well in terms of just getting people connected and creating a community of learners. And like, yeah, I think that's very much aligned. I'm super excited about it. I think that sounds amazing. I'm mindful of the time, and I just thought it would be a good time to open up for questions. So for the audience, if you have any questions, this would be a great time to start dropping them in the chat. Do share with us your thoughts as well. So just contribute to the discussion. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer. And I love what you guys were saying about higher education. So on the higher education side, there's a lot of push, of course, happening about, not a lot of push, but there are kind of organizations coming out and saying, okay, how can we create individualized learning for students where they almost kind of create their own curricula, right? So stackable courses essentially, because learning is individual. And in organizations, we see this as well, because at the end of the day, an organization has to be able to align individual goals for their own career development and professional development with business goals. Otherwise, if there's no match, it's very difficult to make these things happen. And it sounds like using the model that you've discussed, it's a great way for people to create these, whether institutions as a student or an organization as an employee, how can you create your own curricula for development in a way that works for you? And of course, with support when you need it the most, because Edan, I completely agree with you. This whole, shift towards coaching, that human support is essential, and technology is there as a tool to make it easier for us to implement these things. So I think it's the future. I think we're going to see a lot more of it coming out, and I'm really excited to be talking to two people who are essentially pioneers in this field. So
Elena, I just wanted to drop a last question, because we always have this discussion with human resources people about, yeah, what you're selling to me or what you are explaining to me is an LMS. And the major challenge is that cost of implementation of an LMS can go from 1 million to 200,000, or maybe cheapest 100,000. So if we wanted to rechange the way people learns, does it have to cost that much? Edan, what is your opinion on that one?
Yeah, I don't think it's have to cost that much. I don't think, by the way, also that the LMS is the solution for effective learning. I think many times it's about creating the right mindsets when you're designing and building your training. There are for example, I will put our website in the chat. It's fine, so you can have a look as well. So there are tools like MyQuest to actually are much cheaper than the LMS and allow employee to create effective learning in the flow of work and really build a true learning ecosystem. Either if you want to create a formal learning and adding a coaching on it, or if you want to just connect people in the organization and create a learning ecosystem.
Okay, good.
Great. And we have a question. How can you track or quantify effective learning success of the employee over time?
So this is one of the biggest challenge of L&D departments. I think one of the reasons why L&D departments many times struggle to get budgets is that it's very difficult to show ROI and how it connected into real business results. Now, there are multiple ways on how to go about this. If you're creating, for example, right now a formal training and you want to see what is the success of the employee, first you always want to create I think, end goal, something that you want to measure yourself on, like a KPI, and you want this to be measurable and you want to track it. So many times, if it's a sales training, you can track like what has changed in sales. If it's even safety training, you can track like if you got a change in the number of accidents in the organization. Or you need to think what is the thing that you want to measure, and you need to see what actually was the situation before the training and what actually was the situation after the training. This is the best way to track it, and it's very specific per training. And now, obviously, if you want to take one step back, you can also create assessments and stuff like this after the training. But the best way to actually track the effectiveness is try to find the KPI which is connected to business result, and really try to track how this KPI has changed before the training or after the training. I can tell you, to give you another example for such a KPI. So for example, for the tool that I told you that we connect employee around daily challenges they face during their work. So how can we showcase this is effective? So what we do after we connect two employees and we help employee with their daily work, we actually ask the employee, how much time did we save you by getting you this colleague or expert to help you? So then we can showcase organization in the last months, for all of the employees, we saved 2 years of work. So this is a very tangible KPI that eventually you can go back to the managers in the organization and show them how learning actually affected real business outcomes.
Edan, something that we currently do in Besern is that as it's very difficult to imagine to do the philosophical discussion about what is the business outcome, that sometimes it is not quantifiable in dollars. What we always use as a proof is the number of micro behaviors that have been implemented. So because actually when you pay, it's not about learning knowledge, you pay for actions. So we show them how many people have been practicing micro habits after the training, and even 6 months down the line, if they continue doing these micro habits. So actual quantifiable, visible actions, it should be the real thing that we measure. Training cannot be any more about satisfaction survey or quizzes to know how much you have learned just one day after, because as you mentioned, a couple of months down the line, nobody will remember anything.
Yes, I think it's another, eventually, every training is different. Like the ideal thing to track is like a KPI, which is related to business outcome. If you don't have such a KPI, then what you say is true. You can measure activities, you can measure engagement, and then you can assume that there will be a correlation between this engagement to real business results and outcome.
Great.
So what it sounds like is that the future of learning is here, and it's really just comes down to whether we as organizations are ready to face it and take advantage of it, and essentially just be ready for it in order for us to maintain our competitive edge and relevance in the world of work. And again, you know, as I started this conversation earlier, the choice is ultimately ours, and it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. It does not have to be difficult. Change can be simple. It can be very applicable and friendly to our brains and our employees, of course. And I think that with the different models and technologies we have available that we've shared here today, it makes it very possible for us to really be proactive in the way we teach our employees and the way we learn ourselves. I'm curious if there's any other questions from the audience. Otherwise, if there's any final kind of couple of words from each of you. From my side, I want to thank the audience for their attention. Thank you for being here with us. If there's anything you want to add, please feel free to do so. Ivan, I think you wanted to share something as well.
Yes, Edan, if you can kindly give me back the host, that would be nice.
I just did it.
Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that if you want to continue the discussion, the three of us are quite active in LinkedIn, so please shoot for any questions to understand more about the model. I am personally a big fan of the AFT model. In fact, anything that helps develop and fulfill what an employee can do at work, it is something that we are quite a fan. If you want to learn more about how digital learning is powered by behavioral science, you can go to this website. You have the QR code. You can also go to myquest.co, and I'm really excited about how much we have been able to put a perspective on what is not working currently in the workplace in terms of the development of people, and how during this phase of COVID there has been like a push to change the things, and we are glad that they gives an opportunity to rethink everything that we have been doing during the past period. Now, the new normal is not going to exist. The new normal is something that we are currently designing, all of the society, the corporations, the organization, people like Edan, rethinking the models for better learning, are creating and designing the new normal, and not we don't want to go to the old normal where people are just ticking boxes about what they learn.
Edan, any final words from you?
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to thank you both for hosting me in this webinar. It's been a pleasure. And I agree with Ivan. Eventually, like, I think it's all about creating impact and not ticking the boxes. And when we, you know, like, for me, like, as a CEO of the company, many times, you know, when you hire a person, there is a very big difference between hire someone who's excellent employee to a good employee. Like, the impact on the organization is tremendous differently. And I think it's the same with learning. Like, if you create learning program, it's not about doing more programs, it's actually about doing less. But when you're doing these programs, you want to make sure that this program are effective, and you want to make sure that it actually create real impact for both for the employees and for the organization.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was lovely to have you, Ed, and really, I appreciate that you made the time for us, really.
Of course.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you to our audience for listening.
Thank you for everybody. And we are going to be sharing the recording to any of you so that you can catch up on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye-bye.